Yeah, everything's kind of messed up ever since I upgraded my software. Here, where's the Benny? Ah, now come back. There we go. That should do it.
Presenting Benny Goodman and
Even
his
Chris
orchestra.
and Kurt. Hey, buddy. What do you got? Go ahead. Oh, hey. That's alright. Nah, he's not. He thought about it for a bit. Hey, sorry, everybody. Just doing a quick cat check over here. Sammy, the upstairs cat, was thinking of coming in. Hey, Martin and Sarah and Karen and Don and Timothy, Larry. Hey, Leah and Casey. Hey!
And that was Benny Goodman's
Oh, hey,
joyful invitation
speaking of
to Let's
hey.
Dance. And we advise
There.
you to take full advantage of it because we're going to present a half
Better.
hour of his sensational swing rhythms from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. The first
Hey,
two,
Georgia
Farewell
and Tony and Gladys, Robert, Susan, Paula. Hey, Betsy, Julianne, Timothy. Hey, Octavio. Hey, enjoyed the Straight No Chaser concert, Mona. Hello, Andrea. Evening, Dad. Hey, Jerry. Hey, Brooklyn. It's alright, Tacone's over on YouTube. Good evening to you too, Ann. Hey, Bob. Hey, Amy. Evening, Jan. Hey, Betty, Marla. Evening, everybody. Welcome along. We got some Buffalo Trace tonight. I use that Drizzly app they keep advertising on MSNBC. I don't know if I like their jingle, but I like that that they have a jingle. I didn't actually use it to order anything, but I used it to find out where I could get some Buffalo Trace around here. Hey, Christine, sorry to hear that. Hey, Diane, Tracy. Adam, same. Hey, Elizabeth and Emily. Hey, Bob, hey, Becky.
And that's just a polished idea of what we may expect during the ensuing 30 minutes.
Evening all around. Hey, Mom. Hey, Kendra. Hey, Susan.
Star in I'm Shooting High.
Yeah, they had 11 votes now. They almost had a 12th. The Democrats were fully prepared to keep doing this all day. Reports are in that Kevin McCarthy has agreed to legally change his name to Twinkle, kiss Matt Gaetz on the buttocks before the next vote, sign away all of his paychecks, wear a tutu most of the time, and occasionally fuzzy kitty ears. This will not get into 218 votes. There's basically no amount of dignity that guy is not willing to trade away for a job that nobody else even wants. You know, we used to be known for our brokered conventions here in Chicago. It took how many dozens of votes to get around the nominating James Garfield in 1880? A few for Lincoln. Evening, Kathy. Hey, Kimberly, welcome back. Hey, Kendra. I hope we show you some cool stuff tonight. It's been a while since I've done this one. I had to brush back up a little bit. A lot of it is just cool stories that I've come across just in researching for the mini tours in the morning. Speaking of, tomorrow's Find a Grave is going to be a pretty big one. I think it's findable. Research indicates that it's findable. At least, kind of findable. Hey, Ed from Warren. Evening, Ellen. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all here tonight.
Give Benny Goodman a tune like Stompin' at the Savoy and listen to what he can do with it. Just listen to Stompin' at the Savoy.
Hey, Ava. Glad you at least popped on. Hey, Grandma Belle. Carol, now there wasn't really enough snow to stick. There's like maybe a thin film. Hey, Gina. Hey, Katie. Hey, Mike. Evening, Amy. And that sucks. Hey, Bill and Donna and Pepperana. Hey, Bob. Hey, Pam. Hey, Christine. Hey, everybody. Welcome along to Mysterious Chicago. Ooh, Kathy, that sounds good. Hard to get a good grinder outside of Iowa. Specifically the kind of grinder sandwiches they have there, which were originally known as a racial slur that I had no idea was a racial slur as a kid. Even when somebody told me it was a long time before I figured out which race, which word and which race. I watched Troll 2 last night. Got a wild hair to watch Troll 2 again. Or at least I had it on. Hey, June. Hey, Scott. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you all here. And a grinder is basically a ground sausage sandwich. Or the Iowa-style grinder. It's also a general name for large sandwiches. But anytime I'm in Iowa, it's part of my task is find a place that'll sell me a good proper one. Octavio, no. Octavio, have you not seen Troll 2? I would be stunned if you had not seen Troll 2. Hey, Margaret. The proper one is specifically is an Iowa dish. Mostly ground sausage, there's also some beef in there, some mozzarella.
Here's Joe Harris to sing it, the Basin Street Blues.
Christy, I'm on about my third watch of Glass Onion. Kendra, yes. Anytime I pass a Casey's, we're getting some pizza. We're going to let Benny Goodman do one more song here, then we'll get going. Hey, Kathleen. Evening, Karen. We'll give everybody a moment here. Well, those of you who have not seen Troll 2, maybe I shouldn't spoil a bit of it before you go into it. It is on Amazon Prime. You won't be able to look away from Troll 2. As bad movies go, it's remarkably watchable. Which is the real problem with most bad movies, is you just can't save them. They're just boring. This never really gets boring.
You'll never know how nice it seems and just how much it really means. I'm glad to be just 30, where welcome free.
Cameron gets it.
Where I can lose.
Double-decker bologna sandwiches all around. Octavio, yeah, 1990 Troll 2, but it is not connected to Troll. Nor there are zero trolls in the film. It is not actually a sequel to anything. I also watched Gremlins 2 again recently, which is a cinematic masterpiece. History in Nilbog next, yes. There's really more history in Nilbog than you'd think for such a small town. Ghostbusters 2 has its moments. Gremlins 2 is an absurdist, surrealist masterpiece disguised as a blockbuster sequel. We're letting Benny finish up this soon. But you know what, Benny? This one is taking too long. It is time for us to get going. This particular broadcast of Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago doesn't line up properly with getting going by 8:03. So, all right, welcome along, everybody. Things getting a little bit weird here because the software upgraded, and for a while I had to have this thing on here twice, but welcome along. I'll try to keep that from, you're seeing double 4 Adams here. So welcome. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, and I just got word that I'm going to be getting 5 years of back royalties on my book about silent film in Chicago. That's $240. I'm going to spend it all on pudding, of course. So, welcome along. I'm author of such other books as Mysterious Chicago, the book, now available on audiobook to my great surprise. H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil. This is one that has earned me $240 over the last few years. You might be thinking, Adam, where did you get $240? Right there, baby. All right, brand new from Thames and Hudson, Murder Maps USA. This is an old enough deck, I don't even have the Graceland book up in here. The most recent Graceland Cemetery, Chicago Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. So, all right, today we're going to be talking about Lakeview and Lincoln Park. This is a neighborhood about roughly a mile north of the Loop in downtown Chicago. You've got to get above River North, you got to get above the Gold Coast area, but then a little over to the left of that, you will come to Lincoln Park and Lakeview, stretching up towards about Wrigley Field. We'll start out, it looks like, right down here on Halsted Street. Just kind of wander down the street a little bit. Susan Mike has already gotten his 240. He was still getting his checks. They had a typo in my zip code, and apparently I was impossible to contact. Right over here, we've got this place, the Golden Dagger. It's a coffee shop / bar, previously known as the Tonic Room. This used to be one of the stops on my Weird Chicago tours back when I was one of the founders of Weird Chicago Tours a good 15 some odd years ago. Was it really that long? It was longer. Now, we dug into this place quite a bit because, for one thing, they told us that it used to be a meeting place for a cult. The basement was said to be an old cult compound. There is also stories about it being a North Side mob hangout back in the 1920s. People have seen the ghost of a guy who looks like a 1920s kind of guy hanging around in this general vicinity. Now, I never saw the ghost myself. I don't have any data about anybody dying inside of the place. And of course, every place on the North Side is said to be a North Side mob hangout, the same way every place on the South Side is said to be a South Side mob hangout, and the same way that every small town in America has said to have been a place where Al Capone had a resort or a hideout. What we do know about this place, though, is in the 1970s, it was an occult bookshop. This is really a remarkably open-minded article that came out in 1970 about the place. But there was a group, though, the Sabians, that used to meet down there. There's all kinds of, like, Ankh and Egyptian-style imagery down there. And in the basement, I guess they've now got this thing framed, but buried in the basement, they found this skull-head dagger. Now, it might have been cleaned up by now. It was all rusted to heck when we used to go out there. They would just kind of keep it rolled up in a towel behind the bar that they could bring out and show to us here. Check out that thing. There's some theories as to what it was used for. Probably not like human sacrifice or anything. It was probably some kind of ritual magic thing. It was probably smeared in various fluids and then buried. Well, you know, sometimes you just don't want to know too many questions, especially if you're actually going to touch the thing. I understand it is filled up. It's on a frame now. We'll go across the street from here a little bit. Across the street and a little ways down. See, these are mostly newer buildings, but you do get these older ones kind of stuck in the middle of all of these modern ones. And coming up here is Lill Street. Now, we mentioned Lill Street on the Rose Hill Cemetery tours. Mr. Lill was involved in the biggest sex scandal of 1862. But right here on Halsted and Lill was once one of the most famously haunted places in Chicago. It was 1195 North Halsted, back before they changed around the street numberings. Another haunted house has been discovered. This time it is on the north side. Southwest corner of North Halsted Street and Lill Avenue stands a rickety frame house, about which some weird stories are told. Or rather, about the garret in the house, in which the spook is said to pass its nights in the early hours of morning. Also, we'll move down just a little bit from here. Just to get your bearings to someplace a little bit better known. The Kingston Mines is right up over here, one of the last blues clubs still operating in the city. You can debate the merits in the comments. There's also the Kingston Mines Theater Company put on the first versions of Grease. Back when it was, the original versions were a lot raunchier than the version that eventually ended up on Broadway, and there was a lot less plot, as I understand it. It was more just a collection of songs. But back over here on Lill Street, the story went with this place. Nobody could ever really find a good backstory to go with it, other than a man who lived there with two children in the 1880s. They were all murdered in the garret, then dragged down to the first floor. Nobody's really found anything about this, but it was operated by a guy named Charles Heim, a broom maker, who was also operating a bar on the first floor. He offered $5 to anybody who would spend the night in the garret. People who tried said that they would wake up hearing screams, and they'd look up and see a woman in white with eyes the size of saucers, looking down on them holding a handful of burning sulfur. Now, the cop who lived nearby said that such stories of the place had been going around since before Chris Heim, the broom maker, got a hold of the place. My guess has always been that Chris Heim was hiring somebody to put on that dress. It's not really a picture of it. It wasn't that widely reported at the time. Just a couple of days of stories in the Chicago Tribune. While we're here, we're going to go up just a little bit further and quick check out the old Ivanhoe Theater, which is still standing. It's now a Binny's Beverage Depot. Now, Tom Waits performed at this place in the 1970s. I believe it is a scientific fact that liquor purchased at a place where Tom Waits performed in the 1970s tastes better than liquor bought at a place where Tom Waits did not perform in the 1970s. It's like the same bottle of bourbon will taste better coming out of this place. But let's move just up the road from it a little bit here. Or across the street. Well, first you got your books, rare, medium, and well done. And then this building here. If somebody told me, this place used to be a brothel, I'd have been like, sure it was. In fact, it actually was. Back in the early 1930s. It's retail on the first floor, now apartments up above. There's a wider view of it. But in 1931, there was a woman by the name of Helen Deal who had been lured to Chicago from Fort Wayne with a promise that, oh yeah, we know some people here. We're going to get you a job here. You'll get a good paying job here in Chicago. That job turned out to be as a masseuse in this building. I put masseuse in quotes there. But she worked there for a guy by the name of Colantino. And after 2 weeks, she came into Colantino's room and said, I'm out of here. And she grabbed a gun off of his nightstand and he said, ha, I dare you to shoot me. That's exactly the wrong thing to say. She did in fact shoot him. She shot him in the neck and then shot herself in the shoulder. It was an attempt at a murder-suicide, but it wasn't successful. She killed him, but managed to only vaguely wound herself in the shoulder. Initially, it was reported that she had shot him because she thought he was her fiancé and found out that he had another girlfriend. It was a little less simple than that. So, when interviewed about it later, I don't know what her real name was. She made a big deal out of saying, no, of course Helen Deal's not my real name. Don't go asking foolish questions like what my real name is. I wonder if I can find it in the coroner's inquest. Because they brought her before a grand jury, and the grand jury decided that it was self-defense. And that's kind of a stretch by most definitions. The coroner, I know, and the detectives involved in the case were just furious. They wanted her to be arrested for murder. But the coroner's inquest said, yeah, nah, he had it coming. And she was quoted as saying, I'm glad I didn't succeed in killing myself. Maybe life still holds a bit of pleasure for me. And I don't really know whatever became of her. Again, I don't think Helen Deal was her real name, though I might be able to find it. She might have had her real name written in the coroner's inquest report, which will probably be not too far from where we'll be tomorrow for Find a Grave Friday. Now let's move over to Roscoe Street, shall we? Octavio, I've definitely been to that Benny's after being in Graceland. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Gene. So here, they got this old apartment building, which in 1919, there was a guy living here by the name of Elias Purcell. He was a songwriter from either Duluth or Hibbing, Minnesota. I forget which of the two. In any case, he's the second most famous songwriter from Duluth and or Hibbing, Minnesota, after Bob Dylan. I'll actually be in Duluth and Hibbing myself in a couple of weeks. But one day they walked into the place and found him dead, tied very loosely to a chair. A breakfast table was set for 3 people. They could not find any method of murder sitting around. There was no murder weapon or anything. There were just clues all over the place. Now, initially they were even saying, did he somehow hypnotize himself and make his own heart stop? Was he just scared to death or something? Because they just could not find a reason that the guy had actually died. Now, there were 2 theories. One was that it was a murder, and the other is that it was a suicide. The other was that maybe it was a suicide made to look like a murder so that his family would get the insurance payout. In particular, the police said that whatever happened, they believed that the breakfast table being set for 3 was camouflage. Camouflage was a word that they had just learned during World War I, and everybody was just really eager to use it in a sentence. It just sounded so cool. It's kind of like, people these days love talking about gaslighting, but they very rarely use it correctly in a sentence. It was the same thing was going around with camouflage in 1919. So they ended up calling this the mystery of 1,000 clues. There were clues everywhere. Finally determined that he had died from nicotine poisoning. And it's the thing, nicotine will kill you really quickly if you get a couple of concentrated drops of it. What you get out of a cigarette is a very, very tiny amount of nicotine. 3 or 4 drops of the stuff would kill you just about instantly. So, trouble was they couldn't find the empty nicotine pouch. They couldn't find any kind of empty vessel for it whatsoever. And it was very hard to get it in pure concentrated form. People did buy it. They used it as a pesticide. But pharmacists generally took care of writing down when somebody actually went so far as to buy any of it. They couldn't trace his nicotine purchase to anything else. So really they couldn't decide for sure whether it was a suicide or a murder, but eventually the insurance company did pay it off as though it had been a murder. But one of those things we'll never really know. They were asking questions like, can a man stop his own heart, then bind himself? The kind of question that would come up in these stories now and then. eventually determined to be nicotine poisoning. None of his songs are really well known today anymore, I don't believe. Oh, let's check this joint out. I love this place, one of my favorite houses in the whole entire world. Yesterday, we were right by the mausoleums of the people who built it when we were looking at 2 days ago, when we were hanging out with those coyotes at Graceland Cemetery. This is the Dews Mansion at 503 Wrightwood. Built in 1896, the architects Cudell and Herx, who also did Cyrus McCormick's house, so they were occasionally in the works for some real jerks. But this was built for a brewer named Francis Dews. The story goes that he went to the World's Fair of 1893, saw all of the buildings with statues all over them, this Beaux-Arts style, and thought, wow, I gotta have a place like that. So he bought the place, didn't really have a whole lot to tell. There's not a whole lot of stories about him. When he died in 1921, the place was bought up by an organization of Swedish engineers, and they used it as like a clubhouse and office for many years. In the early 1970s, when they were about to go out of business or no longer needed a clubhouse, they were trying to find a buyer, tried to find a buyer, but couldn't do it. It looked like the place was going to be bought up by a developer and just torn down. But then along came a guy in his early 20s by the name of George Santo Pietro, who was in the process of starting his own men's magazine called Coq. Like, French for chicken. Get it? So his idea was he was going to start this magazine. It was going to be more of a working man's, everyman magazine, but he still wanted to be Hugh Hefner. He had to have a mansion. I was quoted as saying, hey, don't quote me as saying hell. My mother would get upset. Well, hell, mansions are all right. I can understand wanting to live in a mansion. Certainly trying to emulate Hugh Hefner's lifestyle a little bit. Also bought himself an Excalibur that he would go driving around in. Here's George Santo Pietro himself. We'll see a little more of it in a second. But also, while he was musing with reporters, he also thought his other dream was to introduce America to sushi. And identifying with Hugh Hefner, I love what it says here in the Tribune, identifying with Hugh Hefner, his bunnies, and sports cars is no problem, but are we ready for raw fish? Coke only lasted a few issues. The building itself was sold a couple of years later to Danny Seferdine from the band Chicago, who co-owned it with a mobbed-up nightclub owner. It is currently owned by some property management company that uses it as an event venue every now and then. George Santo Pietro disappeared from Chicago in the late 1970s, reemerged in the news in the late 1980s when he married Vanna White. It was, I know it's the same guy because it came up in Irv Kupchenit's column saying, a Hollywood Report has Vanna White, a Wheel of Fortune, linked romantically with George Pietro, a.k.a. George de Pietro Santos. We don't want to get Vanna's vowels in an uproar, but does she know the real Pietro? He's well known in Chicago as an alleged con artist with his own Wheel of Fortune. Among many local scams, Pietro bilked the wife of a millionaire out of $125,000 and also tried to dupe a Chicago hotel out of a huge sum, but made restitution after he was seized. Known to tool around town in a white Excalibur. Now, I told this story a couple of times. There was also stories about him working as a dolly grip, a camera operator on shows like The Mandalorian and The Good Place. He currently lives in Thailand. He actually got in touch with me via Twitter as I was asking all these questions. It turns out that is his son of the same name who who is a camera operator on television shows. But leaving behind a very wild and twisting saga of this house. And just up the road from this, here is still within the Lakeview district. Move on up to a rather unassuming looking apartment building here. He is now divorced from Vanna White, incidentally. I put it on TikTok and it got like 200,000 views or something. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't translate to much. But here in this rather bland apartment up here on just a little bit north of the Dews Mansion, 1977, a woman named Teresita Bassa was found slain inside of this place. The fire department had gotten a call that the place was on fire, broke in, and found Teresita stabbed to death inside of the place. As And then eventually, there was a suspect by the name of Alan Showery. The way they found this is he'd apparently robbed some jewelry from her. They thought it was an assault case. Found out that no, she had just been stabbed, and that was about it. Then her place was set fire to. But then a woman by the name of Remy Schwa, who worked at the same hospital as Teresita, started speaking in Teresita's voice. And people started calling it this possessed spirit. Her husband called the police, and the police said, well, we'll take any kind of clue that we can get. She named not only the killer, but also the motive, that it was the jewelry. And this is Teresita herself. This ended up being a major case. It was rewritten as the voice from the grave. People still hold it up as like proof that possession is real, proof of the afterlife. When they say these things, they usually have to say that she couldn't have possibly known these things. She didn't speak her language, didn't know anything about her, had never actually met her. That's exaggerating quite a bit. Remy Schwa was in a particularly good position to have known what was going on. Apparently the voice from the grave thing was just the way she felt safest and most comfortable telling the story. Now, after a mistrial, Alan Showery, kind of by surprise, changed his plea to guilty. So he ended up doing many years in prison for that. I'm not sure anybody knows what's happened to him since. And just up the road from this, we'll cover this just briefly, this absolutely gorgeous, super cool apartment building called the Brewster Apartments. They like to say that Charlie Chaplin lived here. He absolutely did not. They have all kinds of stories about the place. One that I will say is Evelyn Campbell, a newspaper reporter for the Chicago American, lived here for a while she was investigating Johann Hawk. Johann Hawk cursed her towards the end of his life. Promised that he would come back to haunt her, in fact. Johann Hawk, of course, is the Bluebeard serial killer that I've been working on a book on the last couple of months, but a major part of the book is the reporters who were covering the story. Evelyn Campbell was the best writer out of any of them. Let's just go quickly over here. Elsewhere in Lakeview. Up here on Pine Grove, was the home of a guy by the name of Parker Mason, right about on this spot. It was a very weird-looking house. It's kind of like an industrial-style house with a little bit of an Italianate tower up on top of it. Parker Mason was one of our local eccentrics. He was involved in the whiskey ring, that scam where millions of dollars that was supposed to go to the government for whiskey tax was instead going into the pockets of government officials. Parker Mason was a big part of that and known to threaten to kill people who got too close. But he built himself this massive mansion on Pine Grove, but didn't really live in it. He lived in a little wooden outbuilding and mainly used the mansion as a laboratory. You know, people would tell all these stories about what the heck the guy was building in there. Like, you know that Tom Waits song, What's He Building in There? What the hell is he building in there? This Parker Mason could have been that. Word had it that he was working on a flying saucer or a flying machine of some sort. It turned out not to be the case. But also there were stories about the boulder that was on the premises, this massive boulder that some people said was from a quarry at Ashland and on Ashland. Others said that it was, in fact, from outer space. It was well known that he wanted it on his grave, but he's buried at Rose Hill Cemetery. There's no sign of the boulder there, so I don't know whatever became of that boulder. Next slide, I don't even... Oh yeah, I know what this is. A typo there. Move a little bit further up the road. So many of these gorgeous courtyard-style buildings up here. A little further up Pine Grove from there. This place was a hideout in the early 1930s of the Ma Barker gang, also known as the Barker Karpus gang. Now, this is like after Prohibition was on the wane, gangs needed a new way to make money. So what they started trying to do was kidnap people. So the Barker Karpus gang kidnapped the adult son of the owner of Schmidt Beer, held him hostage for $200,000. There was a general sense that nobody could really stand to this guy and probably would not spend $200,000 to get him. But they did get the money, but it was all in marked bills. They couldn't really spend it. After Babyface Nelson died, Alvin Karpus here was public enemy number one. So the feds eventually staked this place out. They caught Doc Barker, who slipped in some snow and cracked his head open and was caught, shot one member, then raided the place and arrested a guy by the name of Byron Bolton. They'd been looking for Byron Bolton for a long time because they had found his name on an envelope when they raided the building across the street from the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Let's go down and check that space out. Down on Clark Street, 2100 block of North Clark, was this little garage. Just a little parking space now. Here's a nice little view of it. You can see the column. So Valentine's Day in 1929, 7 guys from the Bugs Moran gang had been lined up against the wall here and shot. Or 5 guys from the gang plus 2 guys who were affiliated with the gang in some way or another, lined up against the place and shot. I came back here on this foggy Halloween this year, as it just looked so cool at the time. There was there was at the time there was a garage there where these guys were lined up and shot. There have always been stories about dogs going nuts here. They say that there's some kind of a haunting that affects the dogs, probably because there was a dog present named Highball, a German Shepherd. I've had many dogs pass by this place without incident over the years, but it was a cool place to be anyway, just to be out here on Halloween. They say that on Valentine's Day, if you go out there and there's fresh snow on the ground, you can see the outline to the bodies lying there. I waited for years for there to be fresh snow falling on Valentine's Day. When there was, of course, I went right out there. I didn't see anything in the ground, but I left some snow angels behind for the next ghost hunter to come by. You know, it's only polite, I think. But Byron Bolton, once he was in custody, word went out in the Chicago Evening American that he confessed. They had reprinted everything he said. The thing is, he hadn't actually confessed yet. They apparently got this from neighbors of his who said he'd been talking for a while, and now that he'd been arrested, they figured they could tell the story themselves. It turned out to be pretty close to what he eventually told J. Edgar Hoover. He said that the shooters here had actually been a group that we now call the American Boys. It was a group of guys including like Killer Burke and Fred Gates. They came out of Missouri. They weren't specifically Italian or anything. The story goes that the term was what Al Capone himself used to call them. I don't think you're ever going to find a direct quote where Capone called them that. It came from one of their wives, a woman named Georgette Winkler, who eventually cooperated with the feds as well. Now let's move on a bit. What else have I got here? Oh, okay. Here we got the grave of David Kennison in Lincoln Park, the old city cemetery. He claimed that he was the last survivor of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He definitely was not. I'm not saying the Boston Tea Party. They've still got a vial of tea leaves that he gave to Fernando Jones. And right up around here in the farm and the zoo area, we cover. This is a little bit of what's left. We've talked about this stuff so much lately. One of the things that comes up on my zoo tours around here that I do in October is there used to be a stonemason shop here run by a guy by the name of Edwin Burkhart. He was especially known for his angel statues. This might be one of his angels that is now at Graceland Cemetery. One day a guy came into the quarry by the name of George Hull and said, "Boys, I got an idea. I'm going to cut you in on a good deal. I'll either pay you all $200 each or cut you in on the profits, but I got this giant block of gypsum from Iowa, and I want you to carve it into a giant. I'll pose for you and everything." They said, "Okay, we'll take the cash up front." He stripped naked, got down on the floor to pose, like, "Sculpt me, boys, sculpt me like one of your French girls." So they sculpted him into a giant. Looked about like this. Then he took the giant out to Cardiff, New York, buried it, and a couple of years later called for a guy to come dig a well. Said, "I want you to dig a well right here, right in this exact spot. I got a good feeling about this spot." So they dug this thing up and advertised it as an actual fossilized giant. They called it the Cardiff Giant, 10 feet tall, 10 feet 4.5 inches tall. Taller than the Goliath whom David slew. It became one of the greatest known hoaxes of the 19th century. Trouble is, Mr. Hull had never actually paid the sculptors. So after this went on for a couple of weeks, they wrote to the Tribune and said, "Yeah, that's us. If you need another giant carved, we're your guys. Give us a call." This is a copy of it that is now in Fort Dodge, Iowa, at a little museum. I remember my parents stopping here on the way up to Lake Okoboji so I could see this. That would have been 30 plus years ago now. The original did not have the leaf over him. Yeah. Kids, avert your eyes. You can't actually just about match the face up, though, to George Hull. It does look about like him. Let's check out this building over here on Addison. This is a little ways west. Another great courtyard building. All kinds of cool little architectural touches here. You see that a lot. Now, towards the back of this, back in 1925, was the home of a woman by the name of Clara Hark, Harcq. I think it's pronounced like that. She was already married and divorced at the age of 18 and was now living with her new husband. Meanwhile, her mom had just married a guy who was her new stepfather, even though he was only a couple of years older than she was. They lived up in Fox Lake. There were rumors that Clara was perhaps messing around with her new stepfather, but she and her new husband would go to visit mom occasionally up in Fox Lake, and mom was a very difficult woman, apparently. She would get absolutely furious if they were late for dinner. One day she got really, really mad that they were late for dinner, and Clara said, "Forget it, I'm just going to storm out of this place." So she did, in fact, storm out, and as she did, she said she heard 4 gunshots going off. Mom had been shot 4 times, and a couple times in the solar plexus, once in the mouth. When the police arrived, they found the 4 bullet holes, and then the gun was in a whole other room. And the story there was, well, the gun wasn't with her because we took the gun away from her before she could shoot for the 4th time. But their story was, no, Clara didn't shoot her mom. Her mom shot herself, and then shot herself again, and then shot herself again, and then shot herself again. So naturally, this turned out to be a battle in court over whether a person could actually shoot themselves in the solar plexus and then still fire a couple more shots. Clara was arrested for murder, appeared in court wearing a red dress. They had one expert saying that you could shoot yourself in the solar plexus and then keep shooting. Another saying that you couldn't. Jury decided to take the first guy's word for it. So she was acquitted, then divorced, and embarked on a life of appearing in the newspaper throughout the 1920s for noise complaints and getting in fights. There was one particularly notable case where a reporter just happened to be in the jail, and there she was, shouting, "If they think I'm getting sober, they got another think coming. I'll make so much noise here, they have to let me out." Eventually they did. She spent the several years moving around the Midwest getting in trouble, all through the 1930s. 1944, at the age of 50, she just kind of drops out of the news. In the 1970s, she pops back up again when she lived with 7 cats in Palm Beach, Florida, railing against racist zoning boards. Died at the age of 83 down there in Palm Beach. You know who lives in Palm Beach now? Well, so while we're in Lakeview, it would be a crime not to check out Alta Vista Terrace a bit. This is this very cool little street. It was like a whole little pre-planned community in which the 2 blocks of townhouses are mirror images of each other, but reversed, so you don't really notice it. At least they say that. I don't think that they're exact copies. Let's take a look at the architecture here walking down the road. Take a quick pause there. Well, also, overall, we're kind of by Wrigley Field here. Just up the way is the Hotel Carlos. A place where back in 1932 the Cubs shortstop Bill Jurgis was living. But nearby was a young woman by the name of Violet Valley, who was known as what they called a baseball Annie. She was a baseball groupie. At one point in like the 60s or 70s, I think both teams in the World Series were managed by somebody who used to date Violet Valley. But one day she got too mad at Billy and came to his hotel room here and shot him. supposedly inspiring a bit of the movie The Natural. But she shot him, then shot herself, did a bad job in both cases. Didn't do a very good job of shooting him. He was back on the team not too long after that. And he decided not to press charges. He decided it would be better off for everybody if the whole thing just went away. She decided to take her front page status and go on the vaudeville stage, as so many did, for a show called The Bear Cub Follies. Get it? B-A-R-E. It was a burlesque production in 1932. I don't know how bare she actually was. It's hard to get really good descriptions of what these acts were like. But we'd have a whole other show we do sometimes called The Shooting Showgirls, where we talk about a lot of this stuff. And not too far down the road from here was Anna Sage's place. You can actually see Wrigley Field off there in the distance. And just down the road was the place where Anna Sage was operating a brothel where one of her customers was John Dillinger, the bank robber. She was the one who tipped off the feds. I know how you can get John Dillinger. I know I'm not really here in the country legally. I know you want to deport me. Will you let me stay if I get you John Dillinger? And they said, yeah, of course we can arrange that. And they eventually deported her anyway. We'll also take a quick pick up over here. This is the old Lutgert sausage factory. One day some neighbors knew they hadn't seen Louisa Lutgert, Adolf Lutgert's wife, around for a while. He told everybody she'd gone to Kenosha. Then a couple more weeks went by and people thought, hey, nobody goes to Kenosha for this long. Something's messed up here. Now the place had not been operating. It was closed for some renovations and cleaning. But they had noticed a couple of nights ago there was a lot of smoke coming out of the chimney. Now, this is a very difficult story to tell, because if you mention sausage and murder, people really get disappointed if nobody gets eaten. Nobody got eaten in this case. He had killed her body and had her boiled down in a crude potash. Something that the janitor who helped stir it up referred to as a schleimisch. He didn't speak much English, but everybody kind of instinctively knew what schleimisch meant. Eventually, they found some bone fragments and a ring with her initials on it. This was a very early case of forensics being used. They were able to determine that the bones actually were human bones. There are stories about the place being haunted now, particularly the basement. It's kind of been a running joke in the building for years. Now, when I was first in Chicago and researching this stuff, every book, every article said that it's hard to find exactly where the factory was. It's actually still there. It's now been expanded on. There's also condos next to it. Of course, it's condos now. I remember they really did not want us telling this story at first. They'd come out and threaten us. Sorry, guys, matter of public record. And hey, since we got a couple extra minutes, let's just take a quick look here. Another one from that great foggy Halloween morning. I just figured I had to film as much as I could that day. We're back here in Lincoln Park, the old city cemetery, the last remaining structure, last major relic of the old city cemetery, at least above the ground, is the tomb of Ira Couch, a hotel owner. They recently re-landscaped the thing, but didn't bother to look inside. We still don't know exactly who's buried in Ira Couch's tomb. Well, technically it would be nobody. They would be interred here, not buried. It was built to hold 13 people. As of 100 years ago, the Couch family thought that it was about half full. But really, nobody actually knows. I've seen the lot record for the Couch family at Rose Hill. There's nothing about bodies being moved out of this place. Of course, we've covered this many, many times on the tour, so I won't dwell on it too much. But suffice it to say, I have seen what's behind the door, and it turns out that what's behind the door is another door. There was a rumor about this place being haunted. In the 1880s, a rumor went around that if you hung around at night, right at the stroke of midnight, the door would swing open and a ghostly woman in white would come strolling out. There's only one woman who was ever in that tomb. It would have been Hannibal McGee Couch, Ira's mother. Ira Couch ran a hotel called the Tremont House. Abraham Lincoln spoke there. John Wilkes Booth stayed there. Senator Douglas died there. It's kind of a cursed location. Eventually became a place right across the alley from the Iroquois Theater. It was part of Northwestern University. Tried to help people sneak over during the Iroquois Theater fire with varying degrees of success. But all right, everybody. This is one of the shorter tours, I guess. I thought I was going to run a little bit long, but Once again, I don't really have anything new to plug right now. It's only older stuff. I've been kind of doing. I've kind of fallen behind while I work on this Johann Hawk book. But I got some cool new stuff to tell you about that one tomorrow morning on Find a Grave Friday. Also tomorrow at 5:30, I will be on AM 820 WCPT, co-hosting with Patty Vasquez on Progressive Talk Radio, talking to a guy who's running for alderman right here in my neighborhood. And with that, everybody, we will just hang out for about 20 minutes or so, like we always do. So thanks a lot for joining me. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours, and here is Benny Goodman once again.
Heaven on earth, they call it bed.
Yeah, Mahitable, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly because I never meet another Mahitable.
Ladies and gentlemen, playing for you from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in Chicago. And now, I'm building
Thank
up
you,
to
Nancy.
an awful letdown.
Buffalo Trace. Yeah, we'll go straight from the radio into whiskey and a cookie tomorrow, so that'll still be a thing. Thanks, Ed. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Laura, say hi to Mr. Couch for all of us. I'll actually be right by there. I'm going to be in the microfilm room at the History Museum tomorrow afternoon for a while. Thanks, Laura. I'm excited about the Find a Grave tomorrow. This is one I wasn't even sure was in the United States. Finally tracked down some descendants. David, I love everything about the microfilm rooms, even when they don't really work. Which no two microfiche readers are ever quite the same. Even two of the exact same model will have different nuances. Oh yeah, boroscope, that's what I needed over the couch tomb. It's probably a little classier than just taping my iPhone to a wire hanger. Dates for the 2023 convention. Yeah, it will definitely be like last weekend of September, 1st of October. Thanks so much to everybody who's still hitting those donate buttons, especially joining the Patreon is the best deal you can get. Give me another cool one tomorrow on the Holmes and Hawk tour. In fact, the biggest headline you have ever seen will be tomorrow. Thanks, Marco and Christine. I should check the news. There's just so much happening. What if they do come up with a way to do a 12th vote tonight? It's like, I've never been. It's simultaneously amusing, scary, and boring. I was glad they showed an interview over Matt Gaetz' speech today, though, on TV. I imagine it was just a bunch of armpit noise. Hey, Jordan. Jenna, that is awesome. Jennifer, I think it was really just public embarrassment. P.T. Barnum had been offering to buy the thing, but after he found out it was a hoax, he just made his own. It's not illegal to make a hoax of a hoax. And that Patreon, right down below, patreon.com/AdamChicago, the Holmes and Hawk tier. Holmes, Hawk & Co. and other antique serial killers. Stuff comes out every Friday. Tomorrow you're going to see the largest headline you ever saw. Plus a really interesting and highly accurate article that was written about a news event before it happened. Hey, what's the connection of H.H. Holmes with the Delaware Building downtown? The Delaware Building is the old real estate board building. If you were doing real estate transactions, you had to go into that building to fill out paperwork. It's also, it's like when they auctioned the castle building into receivership, it was in the Delaware Building. Yeah, David, literally extra, read all about it. It doesn't even say extra at the top. It's weird that we still go around saying, like, extra for newspapers, even though newspapers haven't done extra editions in forever. I don't recall ever seeing an extra edition. It's been, my whole lifetime, newspapers have been one a day. That's it. Once in the morning. I don't think I've ever lived in a town that had a regular evening paper. But it used to be they would do several editions a day, most of which don't even survive in the microfilm reels. A lot of the stuff is just kind of lost. Judy asks, anything in particular that triggered your desire to write your Hawk book? Well, I had a lot of the data, and nobody had really done a proper one yet. And it's just a fun puzzle to put together, trying to figure out how much of this stuff was true. Plus, it's such a fascinating era of newspapers, and so many fascinating figures around it. It's also a good logical follow-up to my H.H. Holmes book, as a lot of people from that saga make cameo appearances in the Hawk saga. E.H. Robinson, the jeweler, comes back. M.G. Chappell, the skeleton articulator, shows up again. One of the lawyers shows back up. Very brief cameo by Detective Fitzpatrick. And, you know, it's one of several projects that I had in mind, but I figured it makes more financial sense for me to stick with Chicago stuff. I really want to do another cemetery book about Manhattan cemeteries, but I don't work in Manhattan enough for it to really pay off. So you can see I make dozens of dollars off of the books. Like Flickering Empire, which has made me, in the last few years, $240. I will be spending it on pudding, of course. Those of us who grew up watching The State on MTV can probably not think about $240 without thinking about pudding. Gary, I would like to do one about Rose Hill, but Rose Hill doesn't like me as much. I really need access to the stuff to do these books properly. Most of the time. Whereas like Trinity, I don't think they really have that much. Oh, thanks, Eleanor. Rose Hill gets a lot of emails. There was like an organized campaign to email them telling them that I was an anti-white racist and an anti-man sexist because I like to rip on Wilbur F. Story and various other slavery supporters who were buried there. And you know, Graceland gets the same letters now and then, but they know better where their delete button is. Rose Hill is a little bit more corporate. So they have to give me talkings to now and then. But if they would give me access to the files, I'd love to do a Rose Hill book next. Oak Woods, too, but they're owned by the same company as... They're owned by the same corporation, Dignity Memorial. Oh, Carol, that's cool. We talk about the New York Marble Cemetery on some of these ones. James K. Polk was there for a while. I can't remember if he's in the New York Marble Cemetery or the New York City Marble Cemetery, which are near each other. Yeah, Arlie, I've often joked that I couldn't really, nobody's really going to pay me to tell stories about Iowa history. I'm more likely to make money getting people to pay me to shut up about Iowa history. Now, Oakwoods would be a good one too. There's a lot of black Civil War soldiers at Oakwoods, in particular. Some with fascinating stories, but they're owned by the same company. They're both owned by Dignity Memorial. I think ripping on people like Wilbur F. Story is politically correct. I always tell people what I'm like with the travel company that I work for that sends me out with school groups is we're not supposed to get political on those things, but there's a fine line between not getting political and accommodating bigotry. It's like if I take a group to Arlington, I'm not going to say anything nice about Robert E. Lee. I'm going to rip the shit out of the guy. And I don't understand how people can stand there and look at the tiny quarters that he used in which he housed the people that he enslaved and want to say something nice about the guy. Jennifer, I'm proud to hear that. So, somebody spray painted the word evil on Al Capone's grave lately. And for one thing, I doubt that anybody has that personal a grudge against the guy. And that's just something the cemetery has to clean up. Just do a dance. Well, Judy, these are my tours. If people don't like my politics on here, they can take a hike. And I got nobody but myself to worry about for that. But when I'm on somebody else's nickel, it's a little bit dicier. But no, once again, there's certain things that I just don't think there's any wiggle room on. That's very true. I would definitely spray paint it before I left him a tribute. But really, just do a little dance, guys. It gets your point across just as much. Neither one of them will bother them over much. Do a little dance, make a little love. I've never done that at a cemetery. Definitely met people who have, and will really seem to like telling me about it. Ed has signed up for the Patreon. Thank you, Ed. Somebody named Robot Tussin on Twitch is now following me. That's cool.
Ellen Ward and the band go to town on the words and music of Yankee Doodle Never Went to Town.
So sorry to hear that. Yeah, Ronnie was just texting me the other day to text about how much snow there was on the ground. She landed just fine. Where is Miles? Good question. We haven't seen Miles at all. He kind of hides out when Sammy the upstairs cat is hanging around. Let me go get him. Miles, you got a contact with Phil, buddy. Here's our guy. He's a sleepy guy today. Billy, yes, Sammy is the neighbor's cat from upstairs. Sammy and Rosie both come hang out every now and then. Sammy lives 2 floors up, but he comes and hangs out every now and then. We'll hear him howling outside of the door. The neighbors, more than us, let their cats just kind of hang out in the halls. Ours do too sometimes. The other day I got a picture of all 4 cats in the building in the same place at the same time. That's unusual. Thank you, Ed. Now, here's the thing on the tickets tier. Theoretically, you get a ticket a month. In practice, I don't really count. So people just email me and say, "Hey, I need. Can I use 3 Patreon tickets for this tour?" I don't really go in and check. As long as nobody's totally abusing it, and nobody really is. So. If you ask for like 10, I might make sure you've been there for 10 months. Yeah, let me show, I think I got the shot here. Let's scroll back a little ways. Yeah, here we go. Now, of the cats, the 4 cats, Miles is the least sociable, believe it or not. I'm kind of shocked about that myself. Oh, here he comes. There we go. There's Miles is down there looking out at Sammy, Priya, and Rosie hanging out in the hallway. Have to make it kind of small for them to all fit in the frame, but they're there. Miles just kind of stares and maybe offers a lighthearted hiss occasionally. Miles! Okay, you don't want me showing that picture. I get it. Okay, those of you new here, there is the Mysterious Chicago Regulars and Miles Fan Club Facebook group where the regulars hang out. Oh yeah, he's a star. There he hangs.
We have presented the very danceable rhythms of Benny Goodman and his orchestra, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll set this up over here. There you go.
The Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel.
I don't know why I didn't think of this before, just setting it up on the speaker.
Broadcasting Company.
Carol, the camera battery is charging up right over there. I probably won't bring the camera out tomorrow because I will be going maybe not right from the cemetery to the History Museum for the research day. But yeah, anyway, once again, guys, lots of stuff coming up tomorrow. We've got Find a Grave Friday at 10 o'clock right here on Mysterious Chicago. It's going to be a really cool one this time. Then in the afternoon, I got a microfilm day. And then at 5:30, WCPT Progressive Talk Radio, 8:20 a.m., I'll be co-hosting with Patty Vasquez and the guy who is running for alderman here in the 50th Ward. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. I will see you tomorrow morning. I also hope you are not nauseated, Kristen. So until then, everybody, stay safe and stay strong. And of course, if you can, ladies and gentlemen, have a great night. Thanks for all the support. And of course, stay spooky, everybody. Have a great night.